This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft, because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Kathryn and I are thrilled to be joined by Kavita Das. Kavita Das has taught nonfiction writing at the New School and Catapult, and has written about social issues for 10 years. Previously, she worked in the social change sector for 15 years, addressing issues ranging from community and housing inequities to public health disparities and racial injustice. Das is also the author of the biography Poignant Song, The Life and Music of Lakshmi Shankar. Find her online at kavitadas.com and on Twitter at KavitaMix. So we're excited. You've got a new book out, recently released, Craft and Conscience, How to Write About Social Issues. And you're joining us today to talk more about this. And I wanted to make sure we say right at the top that this affects nonfiction writers and fiction writers equally, I think. In fact, one of your opening discussions and essays that you use is George Orwell's essay on Why I Write. And of course, we all know him for his fiction. And he says that, his catalyst for writing is always a sense of injustice for which he is seeking a hearing. So I just want to use that to lay the groundwork for this conversation, to say it applies to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Kavita, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It is so nice to be here.
Thank you. Why write this book? What inspired you to write Craft and Conscience?
I feel like in some ways, it's been a lifetime in the making, because it draws upon my 15 years of working in social change in various realms of social change. And then I came to writing full time, and I continued to engage with those issues just on the page more so. And through that, I learned, I don't have a traditional creative writing background. I don't have an MFA in creative writing. I don't have an MA in journalism. So I am very much self-taught, but I'm also taught by various workshops. I was very fortunate. I basically created my own MFA, as some people say, by finding those voices that really resonated with me in terms of who had in common with me centering or featuring heavily social issues in their writing. And as you said, nonfiction, fiction, screenwriting, all of these things. I think that we're all chroniclers of our time, and of this moment. So that's what I gravitate towards. So I found those. So it started really with reading, as writing often does, and finding those voices that move us, that we see ourselves in, that we resonate with. And so that's, really where it started. And as I was writing, I, developed lessons, along the way. And then several years ago, I started a class called Writing About Social Issues, and it proved to be popular. And it was focused on nonfiction, because I'm a nonfiction writer. I avidly read fiction, but I'm a nonfiction writer primarily. And so those are the examples in this book are nonfiction. But as you note, some of the amazing writers, they're those people, polymaths, who can write in various genres. And I do think the lessons apply, broadly. And so I started teaching this class, and I would have small, batch of students, and, kind of learn by lessons, and then readings that reinforce those lessons so that they can understand the concepts, on the page. And then as I did this for several years, and I realized, okay, how can I reach more people? Because, the classes would fill up, and, I would keep them small. And I decided to write this book. And I wondered, is there an audience for this? And there is. So that I'm really happy to see that, and hearing from folks, and the truth is, even teaching the class, I've been so inspired by the work of my students, the work that they do, the writing, as well as the work that inspires the writing. So, my class is usually a mix of social change agents, activists, academics who are trying to write for a more mainstream audience about the impact of their work and their research. There are folks who have either witnessed or experienced a social issue and the impact of it. And we really need to be hearing from them, and not just talking heads. So, and for some, my class is literally the first writing class they've taken. And some of them have such powerful narrative voices and storytelling that I try to stay out of the way. Really just say, keep going. This is really important. Keep writing, keep telling the story. It's really vital, and then there's writing and there's publishing, as we all know. And while I do towards the end of the course talk about publishing a bit, I'm really focused on the craft of, writing with conscience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. You open the book with the question of why I write, and you say that it's important, if we're going to write about a social issue, we examine our own motivation for it. And you have experience as a teacher in this wonderful classroom with all of these different people coming in. I'd love to hear more about why you got started writing personally. Was it connected to your background in social change, or just, a creative dream? And then also any insights you've gained from your experience teaching people. What draws us to this life of...
Sure. No, and I came late to it, whatever that means. But I came to it on the cusp of turning 40. So, and like I said, without the traditional background, I was writing. I was in a writing group with a small writing group that met weekly for years of South Asian women. I took my first class probably in my mid 30s, my first writing class, but I had always been I had been an avid reader for a long time. And I think, things find us when we're ready for them is the thing. So I came to writing. There was a specific spark. I was working in racial justice during Obama's second term. And really, a lot of our work was trying to help people understand that we were not, in fact, post-racial, because there was really a belief, a self-congratulatory belief with Obama's election that we did it, we solved everything. And meanwhile, we were actually, as an organization, dealing with, border issues and the increasing killings of, Black men and boys and women also. And so we were, and voting restrictions that were actually really heating up at that moment, but were really not being paid attention to by the media. So these were the things that, we were working on. But so that was what the focus was. And I was working on these issues writ large in society. And it slowly dawned on me that the quieter way that racial injustice works is in erasing stories of marginalized folks and their contributions to history. And it was literally kind of this dawning realization that someone I knew that I'd known all my life, Lakshmi Shankar, who is a Hindustani singer. She was part of the movement that brought Indian music to the West in the late 60s. With Ravi Shankar, her brother-in-law, and George Harrison, and the Beatles, and the counterculture movement that kind of ushered it in. And she was part of that movement, and yet she was not really recognized, and even by her own home country, India. And this question of why, how I both wanted to know, how did she accomplish everything that she did? She was roughly the same age as my grandmother, very similar background, and yet it was like they were so divergent in their lives. She had toured with George Harrison and, been all around the world. And that was very different than, my grandmother's life. So I had this kind of reference point. And then the second question is, why don't more people know about her? Why is her story not known? So these were my burning questions. But having said that, I thought somebody should go and write this book about her, not me. I was already director of marketing, wearing many hats, at this racial justice organization. I had my mission set out for me. So this was something, it took me a while to realize, and some people close to me were like, it's you have to do this. So, and I was like, oh my goodness, how does one write a biography? Where do you start? And you start with the foot that's in front of you, and then you follow that foot. So, I went out, she was out in Los Angeles. And, and I really will say that I saw her story as an American story. She had been here for decades. And so I said, why is this not seen? When I would talk to agents and publishers, they'd be like, oh, this is niche. I hate that word so much. And I said, why is this niche? So I wanted to write a book that was for a broad audience about her life. Like anybody could pick it up. They wouldn't have to know about her form of music. They wouldn't have to know about the form of dance where she was a dancer beforehand. And I really wanted to write it in that way. And it took me a while. I mean, first of all, I had to realize I needed to leave working full time in the field that I was in. I tried to do the part-time thing, but it was a big project. And, I interviewed her a couple of times, and then she passed away. And then I was left in this situation of, do I go forward, or I only have a handful of interviews, and, should I try and write an article and say, well, that's that. But I persevered, and I had a great mentor who said, why don't you publish in India? There's such a huge English reading, audience there, and they would understand her story definitely. And although, like I said, I saw it as an American story, and, I said, okay. And so that's the route I went. And so it was published by HarperCollins India, but it took me 6-7 years to do. And sometimes I think it's good for us not to know how long our dreams will take to, because if somebody told you right then, you might say, well, I don't know. It sounds so long, but, along that, while I was doing that, I'm not a runner, so I don't know why I use these metaphors, but if anything, I'm more of a sprinter than a marathoner. So while I was working on the book, I stayed sane by writing pieces. And oftentimes I was writing about what I had experience with. So issues of equity and justice in the publishing and literary realm, where I came to it, and I really was a bit shocked at how inequitable, things were. And now we're having many more conversations, but at the time it really was, I didn't see it being discussed, at conferences, and I would look around and I would see who, whether it's at the mastheads or, all the gatekeepers, it was really a lack of diversity. So I saw everything is very interconnected is the point. So that's where I started. And so I was writing, of course, I brought my work that I was doing in the social change sphere into my writing. And I wanted to have the same passion that I had for those issues, but just now applying it to the page.
So did you know when you started writing Lakshmi Shankar's story that it would be connected to your social justice work? Or maybe it isn't, maybe it's bringing her music to a broader audience. And then, so I guess let me ask first, is it also a social justice story?
That's a really good question. And that's, I think, at the heart. And I think, I'll connect it to the first question I asked in the book. Yes, like I said, I had those two burning questions of how did she do all of this, and why is she not known? And, why is this not seen as an, American story? Why did her own home country not, recognize her? Is it because, one of the most amazing things about Lakshmi Shankar was that she transcended borders. She transcended not just East and West, and but she also transcended borders within India. And it's easy to focus on just the East and West issues, but the truth is, just like in the U.S., you have very strong differences between Northern culture and Southern culture and Midwestern culture and, and California culture. We have all these subcultures and we subselect into and identify with. India is very much like that. They have, hundreds of languages and many religions and many. So she was someone who was, a South Indian woman who was singing North Indian music, and that just didn't happen. And, it's something that I don't think the world was ready for. So because people feel very comfortable when everybody stays in their lanes. It's like, we don't know what to do with you. Most of the singers in this arena are male and they're from this region. So we're not sure what to do with this person. So I think my family is, my parents are intercaste and interregional. And so I grew up on that uncomfortable divide. And so it was very much part of my life. And so there were certain things about her story that really resonated with me. But I think your point is I think I am a certain type of writer. And so those issues were never going to be tucked away, even though this was a book about a singer and music and, all of that, I was constantly going to be bringing those issues up because I saw them so woven into the narrative of her life. So I ask in the beginning of the book this question of, it's the first question I ask students in my class. So before they've even introduced themselves or we've settled in or talked about like the lay of the land, I ask this question of, is all writing political? And we usually get into a great conversation and people, answer in different ways. Some feel, well, this type of writing is, but that type of writing is an investigative journalism is political writing. Overtly things covering elections are. But, then I ask them, what about, novels? What about, even TV shows, and so they'll say, no, and the question, the deeper question is also, what about the intent? So what about the intent of the writers? Where does that fall? And so they'll say, yes, that some will say, yes, that matters. And ultimately, my belief is that all writing is political. Some writing is explicitly political and more explicitly political, and some is less so. But all the decisions that we're making have political ramifications in terms of who are the cast of characters, where is this, where is the setting, and as soon as the writing leaves us and goes out into the world, it's subject to the interpretation and perspective of readers who might read into it political notions that perhaps the author didn't intend. And that can be, to some people, that can be a very scary, to potential writers. And that's why I think separating writing and publishing is important, because there's time to think about these things at any point in the writing and editorial process.
Are you ready to work with a developmental editor, writing coach, or even a ghostwriter? I help writers hone their craft and bring their voice to life on the page. Whether you're working on a novel, short stories, essays, or narrative nonfiction book, I would love to hear from you. All editing and coaching packages start with a free sample consultation and 1-hour call. Visit wordessential.com to learn more about editing, coaching, and to see what other writers say about working with me. Then reach out. I would love to hear from you. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, before we move on, I want to throw it over to Kathryn to represent the fiction writers here, or you and I can represent the fiction writers. When you think about why you write, have you had this processing before? I guess, do you want me to start and give you you go.
No, I actually had a comment here. So I really like that you said, I wanted to start a conversation, because I know we've talked a lot on this podcast, especially when we deal with theme and kind of developing that deeper idea about what do you want to leave the readers thinking about? What conversation are you starting? And I think this is just a universal question. Like, if you're putting something down on paper for somebody else to read, what is that impression that you want left, and maybe it's one where they have to wrestle with it. And I love that personally as a reader. Give me something to struggle with, and have to grow or change my opinion or research more, so it doesn't have to be nonfiction for me to feel like I've been, this is something new that I have to discover. It can be just all through experience, and it can be creative nonfiction too, is really good for me. I love other people's stories. It's really powerful to experience and create a conversation that way. So yes, I appreciate that perspective. And
Yeah, I think the best writing, regardless of genre, opens doors. It opens doors in our minds and in our hearts as readers. It gives us that opportunity to see something or reflect on something or have that vicarious experience through the journey on the page that we might never otherwise get to experience,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. And what you said, Kathryn, about for me, a huge area of development, or something that was very scary and exciting, was when I went from writing more journalistic nonfiction, I would say, or opinion pieces where let me tell you what I think about this issue, to personal essays that were taken from that focused on me. And it's funny, I mean, I had by that point, in my first several years, I would cover fraught issues. And, sometimes I would make the mistake of reading the comments, and people would come for me and, what are you talking about? And you're this and you're that, and all of that. And some people would ask, oh, how do you have the courage to take on this issue that people don't even feel like talking about at their dinner tables, and you're taking it on, putting your name to it out there. And, for me, I think when you come from the background that I do, from what I was doing, is for me, it didn't seem so much a choice. I felt like I had to. I felt compelled. I feel compelled. And so that's what I would say about that. However, as soon as I suddenly was centering my own story, I felt much more fear, about judgment and airing out, personal things, particularly when I would be writing about my own vulnerabilities, medical issues, or, what have you. And yet, while people would respond to my previous writing, my very issue-focused writing, with, obviously people who are on the same side of me would be like, yeah, you're right, and there would be those kind of conversations, or people who would appreciate, thank you. Next time I have these conversations, I feel like I have great points to kind of counter with. And so that, I enjoyed that. But when I started writing personal pieces, sometimes I would hear back from people. People would find my email or whatever and write to me, or on social media, and people who went through the same medical health issues as me. And it was a very different type of interaction to reach people in that way, and then to feel that your writing had made an impact in a quieter but no less significant way, I would say. So I just I think, Kathryn, the point you made is sometimes when the story, and that's one of the things that I talk about in the book, is are you going to write this? Are you going to write about this from the outside in? So more, talking about the issue and its pros and cons and ins and outs, or are you going to write about it from the inside out, a personal essay? And sometimes you see in opinion pieces, some of them are very strong because, as I say, people can disagree with your opinion, but they cannot refute your experience. And I think that's very strong. And even if you don't change their mind, I think it gives people pause when they try to talk about a group of people monolithically, and suddenly someone is pulling themselves out of a group and really talking about the human experience of something. So I think it's, there are ways to really, and the other thing is the same person can do both, as I've done.
Right. I think the real power of storytelling, whether in fiction or nonfiction, is that we can be intimate with our readers through those personal narratives, whether they're our own personal narrative or we're in the role of interviewer, perhaps, or somebody, sharing an experience, even something that's historical or biographical. We're still bringing to light the individual and making that, putting the face on it. Yeah.
You're removing the distance, and it's really hard to, have it opens up a different kind of conversation. It's hard to have a super antagonistic conversation, individual to individual. It's just different in the mind and the heart of the reader. So
it is. And it's not even if it's not antagonistic, there are so many issues, and we have so many things vying for our time. And it's not that we don't want to care, but sometimes some issues seem, as you said, Kathryn, remote. What does this have to do with me? And so when somebody humanizes the issue, it sometimes, and some issues seem also so big and so vast. A great example is climate change. Mm-hmm. It seems so big. What can I do about it today? Is what I'm doing even making a difference? How is climate change? It seems like something that is always a few, 5, 10, debatably, how many years is it down the road? And some people say, no, it's here now. But when they say it's here now, what do they mean by that? I don't see it out my window. And if I don't see it, how do I know it's there? And if you point to whole communities whose lives have been completely altered in the last 5 years or 10 years, and you can literally point to a family, and this is how they would spend every year, and this is what's happening in their life now. It really helps to take an issue that seems so vast, not to mention, that some don't accept it, or, and all of that. But, there is the scientific evidence side of it that, people go back and, forth on. Although it's pretty incontrovertible, but, but that's the thing, and sometimes I used to be someone who used to think, okay, I have my intellectual arguments here, and I have come to appreciate the emotional arguments and, and how powerful they are. And it's funny because, as I said, I'm an avid, fiction reader, and mm-hmm. I have been haunted by books, literally characters who are not alive, and I am wondering weeks later, what did he do eventually? What did he do? What did they, what happened to them? And then I'm making up my own, sequel. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we are very invested in people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, we are. That's such a great way to think about it. Yeah, invested in their lives. We continue this conversation on the next Storyworks Roundtable episode, so make sure you come back. We are delving deep into the contents of Kavita's book, Craft and Conscience, and getting into all the craft, so you won't want to miss it. And I know Kavita has some upcoming writing workshops. Some of them are online. So head over to her website, kavitadas.com, and we will have links in the show notes, so you can connect with her and check out those amazing workshops. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.